Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Mondays with Mundy. I hope you're coming back for more. These are pretty fun, aren't they? Guess you like them. So 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, we talked about Hamilton Diston and his involvement in real estate development in Florida. And the Distons, all of them practically, are buried at Laurel Hill Cemetery in an area called Millionaires Row. You can remember the light bulb went off at that point saying, there's a future program here. So I put one together about Millionaires Row. So why don't we dig into it? Okay, doke. All right. Now I'm going to share the screen. So that's what I do. We do that. And bingo, it worked again. I don't know why, but I always confused that it worked. With my kind of luck, I guess I figured it wouldn't. You never know. All right. So Millionaires Row. And what does it look like? Well, let's start with Laurel Hill Cemetery. It is Philadelphia's oldest rural landscape cemetery, organized in 1836 by John J. Smith, librarian of the Library Company, with other partners. Keep in mind that in 1836, Philadelphia city itself is those 2 square miles from river to river and Vine Street to South Street, and the rest of it is Philadelphia County. But cemeteries in Philadelphia city, especially church cemeteries, were being swallowed up by the increasing industrialization and the fact that people were moving from the eastern part of the city over to the western part. They were doing that. And so people just wanted a nice place to bury their families. And so the rural landscape cemetery movement was founded in this country in 1831 up in Cambridge, Massachusetts by Mount Auburn. Laurel Hill was second. And so this is the gatehouse as designed by John Notman. And it is there on Ridge Avenue in the East Falls neighborhood of Philadelphia. And that's what you drive through or walk through to this day. Right, and now you can see why they called it the rural landscape cemetery movement. And this is what it looked like once upon a time. Not today. But again, it's an arboretum, it's a landscape garden, you name it, it's there. So this is the cemetery that became the resting place for many of Philadelphia's wealthiest industrialists from the post-Civil War period in the second half of the 19th century, including many of our millionaires on Millionaire Row. So why don't we meet some of them? So this is what Millionaires Row looks like, part of it anyway. It stretches around the road, and this is in the central part of Laurel Hill Cemetery, right off of Hunting Park Avenue. And you can see these spectacular mausoleums, and there are over a dozen of them, and they are just wonderful pieces of architecture in themselves. All right, so we're going to concentrate on just 3 today. I originally started with 6 or 7, and it got too big. We'd be here for days talking about them all. So I found a common theme. So let's go see what it is. And by the way, here we go. Before we do that, upper right-hand corner, if you see that, is the tomb of Peter A.B. Widener. All right. In the background, the one in the foreground is William H. Kemble, who nobody knows about. That's why we're talking about this today. And then on the right-hand side, you just see that the corner of the mausoleum there, that is William L. Elkins. Okay. And they're going to be the 3 we talk about today. And we're talking about them because of this, a trolley car. This is what we think of today as a trolley car, good old-fashioned SEPTA, subway surface car as it's called. There are, I think, 6 lines that run through the city and many more in the suburbs. So but trolley cars were important in the evolution of Philadelphia as an industrial city and as a city of homeowners at the same time. And this is what they looked like in the middle of the 19th century. So this is where our story begins. Right? It begins in 1858 when the city's first horse-drawn streetcar railway was chartered. And by the end of the 19th century, we would have the evolution of the entire consolidated system into the Philadelphia Rapid Transit System that would eventually become SEPTA. And that's what we think of it as today. All right. Hope that wasn't, to go deeper in the weeds, we'd take too long right now. So we'll just stick with that for the time being. So there were 3 important players. We'll deal with the big 2 first because they were known as the Traction Twins. And that was Peter A.B. Widener and William L. Elkins. Okay. So here we have Peter A.B. Widener, born in 1834 in Philadelphia. Father was a butcher. He was a butcher. But as the story famously tells us, Peter made his fortune during the American Civil War, 1861, 1865, when he was able to acquire a contract from the Union Army to supply mutton to all the Union soldiers within a 10-mile radius of Philadelphia. And we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers. And that made Widener a rich man, approximately $50,000. Now he would then expand his butcher shop empire. And as he got more and more money, he became more of an investor. He would, let's see, what didn't he touch that turned into gold? You name it. U.S. Steel, and he was one of the organizers of U.S. Steel, American Tobacco, Standard Oil. I mean, he was on the board of that. I mean, and these are all what became national corporations that would become multinational corporations. So Widener just had the golden touch. People know Widener by and large because of this. This was at one point, it still is actually, I think, the third largest home, private residence in the United States, called Linwood Hall. It's on Elkins Park on Ashbourne Avenue, designed by League member Horace Trombauer, okay, around 1900. And that is where the Widners lived. And this is the ship that he owned. And this is a photograph taken off of the Irish coast by a Jesuit named Father Brown as it began its journey across the Atlantic Ocean. And we all know what ship that was, right? The Titanic. Because it was on that ship that Widener's son, George, his daughter-in-law, Eleanor, and his grandson, Harry, were coming back to the United States. And, of course, his son, George, and grandson, Harry, would go down with the ship, proverbially. And that was that. So that's how most people think of Widener, perhaps in Philadelphia. And, of course, and here we go. All right. Famous headline from it, you can see. So it was ironic, of course, that the man who owned a 20% stake in the International Mercantile Marine Company, 20% owner in the Titanic, would lose his son and grandson. But this is something else. This is the Widener building in Center City, Philadelphia. You can see it's off the southeast corner of City Hall, right? Widener's business dealings were so immense that he actually had Horace Trombauer design a building called the Widener Building, still there, still called the Widener Building, just so he could handle all of his different business assets. I mean, that's how big it was. Specifically, I showed this postcard because there's a trolley car in it, all right? So we'll get to the trolley car story just a little later on, but I wanted to at least introduce you to our good friend, Mr. Widener, okay? All right. And this is where Mr. Widener rests today. He went from Linwood Hall to this wonderful mausoleum, also designed by Trombauer, on Millionaires Row at Laurel Hill Cemetery. And here's the next player in the field. This is the other half of the Traction twins. This is William L. Elkins, who was born in Wheeling, West Virginia, but his father was from Philadelphia. And so Elkins came back to Philadelphia before the Civil War in the 1850s and went to work in a grocery store, literally a grocery store. And Elkins apparently, obviously, was a pretty smart guy because he would end up owning, by 1860, the country's largest grocery store in America. He also developed refrigeration for groceries, green groceries, and things like that. And with the money that he was making there, he invested it in oil refineries. 1858, oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. You have to refine it. And so Philadelphia will become the center of oil refining because Philadelphia had the transatlantic port capability to ship it overseas and, of course, the rail capability to ship it around the country at the same time. And so Elkin, with his money, created the Monument Oil Company that would then become Atlantic and Atlantic. And here's an example of the Atlantic Oil Refinery on Point Breeze on the Schuylkill. And Point Breeze is still the site of refineries to this day. Think of United Energy, things like that. So Elkins would make a small fortune. And in 1875, he actually became a partner in Standard Oil, which had purchased the Atlantic Company. So Elkins is starting to make money hand over fist as well. And of course, Elkins was doing more than just investing in Standard Oil. There we go, there's Atlantic. And of course, Standard Oil would buy Atlantic. Standard Oil was finally broken up in 1911 under Teddy Roosevelt's administration, the trust busting. But in the meantime, both Widener and Elkins made a bucket of money off of Standard Oil. Now, these are some of the companies that Elkins was simply a board of director fun. Can you imagine that? I mean, and these, of course, he's invested in them. He's got other investments as well. And the ones in blue specifically are transportation companies. You can see they're from New Jersey, they're from New York, they're from Pittsburgh. And then so the traction twins were everywhere, to put it that way. Okay. All right. So, and this is where Elkins lived, another Horace Trombauer house, literally across the street from Linwood Hall in Elkins Park, right on Ashbourne Road. And this is where Elkins lives today. So this is his mausoleum, also designed by Trombauer, again in a very neoclassical Greek Revival style, much like the Widener one. Okay, so that was, and you've heard that before, I think. Anyway, so here's the new guy in the story, and his name is William H. Kemble, 1828, 1991. He was born in Woodbury, New Jersey, graduated from Woodbury Academy, and at the age of 14, he did what everybody else does. He came to Philadelphia to seek his fame and his fortune. And he did. All right. He entered a silk and cloth merchant's house. He learned the business. And after a few years, went to New York, where he learned more of the business. Came back to Philadelphia. And at the age of 20, took on a partner and created his own firm, moving into the silk and embroidery business, lace and embroidery, and things like that. It's called Thompson and Kemble. All right. So he's making his money now at this point in time. And this is again in the 1850s. All right. So Kemble, like his other two compadres, has money because he's making lots of it, and he starts investing in traction railways. Okay. And why not? Because, and that's why, let's digress a little bit here. Okay. So, this is just a stop certificate from the Union Passenger Railway Company that Campbell founded in the late 1860s. I haven't been able to find a date for it yet, but let's go back. So 1858, Philadelphia's first horse-drawn street railway comes into existence, and within a year there were 46,000 people a day riding the system, and that's a lot. Now, keep in mind we're talking Center City and going probably north into the industrialized northeast part of Philadelphia, right? By 1860, there are 16 trolley companies, if you will, street railway companies competing for the business, right? By 1876, the centennial year, Philadelphia has the largest trolley trolley street railway system in the United States, right? Over 1 million riders a year. Now we're charging, at this point, they're probably charging about 4 or 5 cents a ride, so you can see how the money adds up, all right? Okay, by 1880, there are 264 miles of these trolley lines in the city of Philadelphia itself. That's a lot of trolleys. And again, they're still being pulled by horses, all right? Although by 1880, they will begin to experiment with cable under the ground, all right? By 1885, these streetcar lines, and there are more even now, we're carrying 117 million people a year, and we're averaging maybe 5 cents a fare. So you can see, again, how that cash register is just overflowing at this point in time. So by 1892, the first electric trolley, as they become called, is running in Philadelphia, and by 1897, the last of the horse-drawn trolleys disappears, and the system is entirely electric at this point in time. So, having done that, let's step back into our subject of William Kemble. So it's in probably around 1870, he creates the Union Passenger Railway Company with two partners, William McGrath and Jacob Ridgway. And eventually both of them would retire from the company, and Kemble would become the president and owner, basically. So, and this is a certificate from that company. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see his signature on the left. And it looks like this is from 18, that's hard to tell. Forgive me. I thought I had it, then I don't. All right. So by 1875, Elkins and Widener are looking at Philadelphia Street Railways going, there's a few bucks to be made there, right? And so they hook up with William Campbell, and they begin buying additional lines and trying to consolidate as many lines as possible into one larger railroad system, because after all, we've all learned that monopolies make a lot of money, and that's what they were going after. All right, so 1883, the three of them are now working hand in hand in hand, and they consolidate the lines that they have and call them the Philadelphia Traction Company. And William Kemble will become the president of that company. So that is Elkins and Widener remove themselves from the daily operations and leave it up to our hero, William Kemble. All right? So Kemble's becoming a very wealthy man while all of this stuff is going on, as you can imagine. So Philadelphia Traction would become bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is what it looked like. And here you can see this is a typical trolley car from the time period. Although by now it is electrified, so it's a little later in time because, again, Kemble would die in 1891. This was 1890, probably in the mid-1890s, but at least it gives you an idea of what Philadelphia Traction was doing and what trolley cars looked like at that point in time. And you can see from the side of the car, it's King Catherine and Bainbridge and what we think of today as Queen Village. Okay. Now here's the Philadelphia Traction Company stock certificate that was being issued beginning in 1883. This one was dated 1885. That one I can read. And again, you can see William Kemble's signature in the lower right-hand corner. And then in 1884, the Union Passenger Company, founded by Campbell and some others, including the Philadelphia Traction Company, would start lacing their lines to the larger Philadelphia Traction Company. So the Philadelphia Traction is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. What's also happening is that these three men are taking this model of Philadelphia and traction company consolidation and applying it to other cities as well, starting in New York. They went to Chicago, where they hooked up with a guy named Charles Yerkes, who was later a member of the League. They also hooked up when they did it in Pittsburgh. They did it in Boston. They went as far as the West Coast. They also went over to Europe as well, into Western Europe, where they also developed streetcar lines over there as well. So these guys are just getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and that's what they did. And to this day, nobody remembers William H. Kemble. And it's a shame because he was really an interesting guy. With his money, he purchased a house, built a house actually. He had the architect James Windrum design him a house at basically 22nd and Green in what we think today is the Spring Garden neighborhood. And he also built a house in Glenside, a country estate or villa called Mary Lawn after one of his grandchildren, because he had two sons, Isaac and Clay, and they produced children, and so there was a community family. And apparently Kemble was a big family guy, loved being a grandfather. And then, of course, the family was always over at the house, as you can imagine, because they had lots of room for it. And regretfully, that tended to be his downfall. But in between, Kemble was known as a fairly straightforward, shoot-from-the-hip kind of guy. Not Mr. Personality by any means of the imagination, from what I can tell. But once you got used to him, he was your friend for life. And became a very generous man and donated a lot of his money. So, for instance, after the great Johnstown flood in Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania did not have $500,000 to rebuild the city of Johnstown itself. And so, literally, Kemble wrote his own check to the state for $500,000. In the faith that the state would simply pay him back when it had a chance to do it, and the state did. So that's the kind of man he was. Really, just a wonderful man in many, many ways, I believe. Right? So he had his other sides. He was very much involved in Republican politics in the state of Pennsylvania and the city of Philadelphia, but that's a rabbit hole we're not going to go down right now today, okay? That's a different talk sometime. So we'll see what happens with that. So it is September the 26th, 1891. Kemble is at his home in Glenside, Mary Lawn, with his wife, with his daughter and son-in-law, who are living with them as well, and their children. And Grandpa Kemble, as he liked to be called, was playing with his grandchildren about 10 o'clock in the morning, finished playing, started to feel his heart constrict, went inside the house to lie down, and literally died 15 minutes later in the arms of his wife. And that was it. So Kemble's funeral was an immense one, as you can imagine. The services were held at Mary Lawn in Glenside, and the funeral cortege wound its way all the way down to East Falls in Philadelphia, where he would be buried in the mausoleum that you saw in the Witten House on Millionaires Row. There we go. So this is the house at 22nd and Green that was designed by James Windrum. I couldn't find one for Mary Lawn, but I'll keep looking, and someday maybe I'll find one. Okay. And Windrum, by the way, was a member of the League. And this is where Kemble lives today, right? Now, his pallbearers, there were 8 pallbearers, including James Windrum, 7 of the 8 were all members of the Union League. I mean, to reinforce that connection. And we're talking about all 3 of them because, as you've heard in previous episodes of these videos, we know that both Widener and Elkins were fairly early members of the League, 1866, 1870 respectively. So, and Kemble had joined even earlier. He joined in 1864. So Kemble was a Civil War era member of the League. And since he broke the Civil War, Kemble had another aspect to him. He believed in civil rights. And in 1871, the Philadelphia Tribune newspaper, which was the newspaper for the African American community, praised Kemble for his support of the 15th Amendment and the right of black men to vote in elections. Right. So you can see he's a multifaceted man and a fascinating character. It's a shame there's not more known about him, but maybe someday we'll take care of that and solve that problem. So this is William Kemble, all right, and that's where he is. So that's our little story today about Millionaires Row at Laurel Hill Cemetery, and specifically 3 of these millionaires. And actually, when they died, let's see, in 21st century money, Widener would be worth $29 billion. Elkins, probably, a little less than that. He wasn't as wealthy as Widener was. Campbell, when he died in 1891, was worth between $3 and $6 million. Not bad. So, while he wouldn't be a billionaire today, he'd certainly be a very, very wealthy man. So interesting stuff, I hope. So thank you for letting me, hopefully entertain you. We learned a bit about the traction triplets, if that makes sense, as opposed to the traction twins. And it's a shame that everybody forgets William Kemble, but without William Kemble, the traction twins wouldn't have done what they did, where they did it, and when they did it, and made all that money. So hats off to William Kemble. All right. Thanks, everybody. That's it for today. So as I look outside my window, I can see it's snowing. So it is December after all. So stay warm, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to the Legacy Foundation and the Legacy Foundation for sponsoring this. Wonderful stuff. Goodbye, everybody.